Here we are at the, what's the name of the show? The Human Heart. The Human Heart Show, where I have some work. And I've got a piece here which I made 20 years ago. And it's a stack of prints. I think it's about 57 prints.
74?
Thereabouts. And it's one of a number of works that I made in the years 1999 to 2000, thereabouts. So basically, I suppose it's quite a curious thing to do, make a sculpture out of printed layers. But it came to me when I was in the studio making an edition of prints, which most printmakers do. And I'd finished printing an edition and I had them all laid out on the table. And I was signing them and numbering them, as you do in print. And I was kind of struck by the dynamic of the works when they were seen together collectively. And it wasn't just their sort of multiplicity, it was something that seemed to arise out of their multiplicity. They seemed to have a collective power, even though it was the same print over and over again. That sameness repeated seemed to have a dynamic to it. So I was immediately struck by this, and I just thought, well, there's something going on here that is interesting in its own right. And so I suppose, I mean, lots of other artists have done this in different ways. Andy Warhol has made his wallpaper and so on. And you know, I think other artists have done similar things. But for me, it was really that you know, there was something there that I really wanted to. I felt that the prints had something that could be used in their multiplicity, and that as a singular entity, they didn't have that same quality. So, and what it was, I didn't really know what it was, and it was only through making these printed stacks that I began to understand what was happening. So I made a few stacks and piled them up, and obviously the first problem you encounter is that if you make a regular stack of prints and place them one on top of the other, you can't see the image. So hence the idea that I would reduce the size of the paper towards the top of the stack, and thereby just sort of disclose the image that was inside the stack. And so I did that, and I suppose I felt that you know, what was actually happening was something to do with a rhythm, or a frequency, or a vibration. And so in a certain way, the form of the artwork began to dictate the subject matter that I was dealing with. So I began to think of, you know, the earlier ones were kind of very much architectural structures, and then I began to think more about, you know, what was happening with this this layering of the image, and the separate sheets, and the fact that the sheets were floating slightly, and so on. And I began to think about working with sound, or images of sound, especially difficult to work with an image of sound, but so I began to work with insect wings, like moths, and various musical instruments, sometimes very primitive single-stringed instruments, or maybe a tuning fork, or one occasion I used a cello, and so I had two intersecting stacks, one stack with the strings of the cello and one with the bow of the cello, which moved at different angles across the strings and so on. So a kind of referencing of sound, and a referencing of instrumentation or vibration, but then also having this kind of integral quality of a physical vibration. Although you can't touch sound or you can't feel sound, the vibration is felt through sound vibrating through other objects and so on. So so that was really how I began working with those images, and I was working with various organs of the body. I used lungs, I used brains, I used, you know, it was kind of inevitable that I would come to the idea of the heart, and I did. So I used an engraving of a heart. I didn't want it to be too bloody. I wanted it to be a kind of a metaphor for a heart, or a representation of a heart, rather than, you know, the blood and guts of the heart. And also, you know, then I thought a kind of a poetic metaphor of a flying heart, the heart, you know, I suppose flightiness, or, you know, people, you know, they might talk about, so under a certain emotive situation, that their heart beats faster, or whatever. So I thought the idea of a flying heart. So this piece is called Flying Heart. And so the stacks went on for a while, and then I began to feel a little bit jaded making them, really, because they're very labour intensive. And I suppose the only way I could do them was to really work like an absolute madman and go into the studio very early in the morning and have all the paper soaked and all the ink mixed up and just print like crazy, drink lots of Red Bull, and just go at it like a madman and get through it. But I used to come out of there with my head spinning and totally exhausted. And so I suppose it was inevitable that I'd kind of stop making them, so I did. But lately I've kind of started playing around with the idea of making them again. But I suppose the heart really kind of took off. I made a number of stacks referencing the heart, and then other images to do with the heart at the same time. And so behind me over there's a couple of prints called Love Hearts. It was a series of Love Hearts where I kind of referenced the idea of the structural or organic connections between the heart and the penis. So it was an idea that came to me actually listening to a program about the drug Viagra and how they accidentally discovered it. It's very interesting that it was originally developed as a heart medicine, and so they had during clinical trials they had a whole lot of people in a ward together, and they were feeding them Viagra to see if it would affect their hearts or cure their heart problems. And all of the patients, I presume all of the male patients anyway, began to get erections, and so they discovered that the Viagra was actually acting on the heart, acting on the penis instead of the heart. So that's how Viagra was discovered. And a lot of, interestingly enough, a lot of medical, a lot of drugs and cures are actually discovered apparently accidentally. So I suppose I began to kind of quite literally look at the heart then as a to expand it or stretch it or whatever, and turn it upside down, and, you know, play with the kind of morphology of the heart in relation to the morphology of the penis. And I suppose there's a lot of, you know, without going stating the obvious, there's a lot of connections there. So, but that's I suppose, you know, that's the work in the show. I suppose as a printmaker, I kind of waver in and out of the physical, hands-on interaction with material, which I love, and, you know, which I think is really, really important in the art making process. I think I'm a great believer in being a producer and a maker, and to learn through doing and learn through trial and testing, and you know, the hands-on, you know, what happens intellectually within the actual physical and technical production of the artwork. So I suppose at times then I drift out of printmaking and I start working with photography. I spend a lot of time working with what I would describe as conceptual photography, where I suppose I was never a great photographer. I was never taking sort of classical good photographs, but I was gathering images more for the purpose of using them in my prints. And so then I suppose I began to look at photography itself as a subject, and the whole idea of what happens in the capturing of an image, and what happens with exposure and depth of field, and all of these things. So I suppose in many ways it was kind of conceptual photography referencing photography itself. And so that was a kind of more sort of hands-off thing, and then I began to realize that, look, I miss printing, I miss going to the studio, I miss that thing of, you know, mixing up ink and inking a plate and winding it through a press, and the whole bodily interaction in the making process that happens in print and in painting and in various forms of sculpture. So, you know, I'd swing then back into digital again, working with those, you know, large-scale inkjet prints and so on. But it's always been that it's been important to me, the whole physicality of making. And even though, as I say, when, you know, if I kind of burn myself out, I kind of go back to working on the computer or something like that, and then I get fed up working on the computer. I begin to hate the computer. Things go wrong all the time. You can't open the back of it and put your hand in and fix it, and I hate that. You know, the other day I had that spinning ball phenomenon, you know, on the screen, and then the ball stopped spinning. You know, I'd never seen that before, and then I thought, wow, this is bad. You know, the ball has stopped spinning. And once I upgraded the operating system on my computer, and the whole thing just went dark from the top down. It just went slowly like this, like it was emptying. The whole image just emptied out of it. I looked, there's a pool on the floor. It's gone. You know. I hate that, you know. And you know, no matter what happens in a print studio, you know, you can always ink the plate up again, or you know, remix the ink, or re-etch the plate, or whatever. And you can see what's going wrong, you know. And the same with screen print. You can, you know, just lift the screen and say, oh yeah, I forgot to put the paper in. That's what happened. So I'm a great advocate of that hands-on making process. It's really important, and how we think, and you know, the way ideas come to us. It's I suppose you could describe it as a reflexive way of working, in the sense that you do something, you're immediately conscious of the doing, and the result of your doing, the result of your actions on the material is evident to you, and you take that into account, and then you adjust your actions accordingly, and you do something else, and then you look again, and you know, that kind of reflexivity, I think, is really, really important in the art making process.
How about the subject of the heart back then when you were making the work, and this current context, maybe even within the context of this show at the time we are in?
Yeah. What do you mean, the COVID, the big
yes,
COVID in the room?
all of it.
Yeah. I think my interest in the heart was very poetic. It was very kind of, you know, the heart as the love heart, or the flying heart, or the beating heart, or the musical heart. You know, the rhythm and the beating, you know, and the throb or whatever of the heart. You know, and all these things were kind of poetic notions. I suppose there is that kind of a dark thing coming in now with this lockdown situation and all that. And I heard a terrible report on the television there about a man who'd had COVID-19, and he said, you know, it's not just your lungs. You know, people say, I think it's a respiratory disease, but it seems to attack every organ in the body. You know, so yeah, I suppose, you know, I suppose the heart is that kind of, you know, we all worry about our hearts from time to time, I suppose, and You wonder, is it ticking at the right rate or whatever, you know. So there is that kind of thing. But then, you know, you look around, and I suppose very few artists have gone into the morbid side of it. Really, it's quite a celebratory show, really, isn't it? I think it's very aesthetic, and you know, it's the heart. It's a monument to the heart, really, isn't it? The whole show.
Mm.
There's very little, if anything, that is in any way pessimistic. Even in these times, as you say, you know, it's not a pessimistic show. It's a good upbeat show.
Mm. And when it comes to the medium of printmaking and all different responses we've got from artists, you being the head of printmaking at NCAD, having a kind of broad overview of the medium and meeting different expressions of it every day.
Yeah.
What would you say about all the different responses here?
In this show?
Yes.
Pretty varied, very varied actually. I mean, there's abstraction over there that you could almost miss the fact that it's referencing a heart at all. You know, Neil Nasson's landscape with some reference to the heart in the sky. You know, I think it's very homogeneous, and you know, people are kind of folding the heart notion in, or have, you know, or have maybe looked at their work. Maybe some might have been invited to the show and they might look at their work and say, well, I've got anything to ever work with hearts, and no, but this is quite heart-like, or there's a reference here that, you know, and you know, that's what happens, you know. I think it's probably better to look at your work and to see if there's something there that might reference the heart, rather than go and make something specifically. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes people respond well to being given a brief or to work to a theme, sometimes they don't, you know. It can be a great catalyst. If somebody says to you, listen, you know, we're doing this show on my heart, we'd like you to do something. Sometimes it can be a great catalyst, but sometimes it can be like, you know, I'm not doing hearts at the moment, you know. And suddenly you kind of think, oh, I'll just run something out, you know. I'll just run something up. I'd like to be in the show, but you know. And I think you can see work that hasn't been done with any great depth of concern, you know. It's funny. People often say to me, you know, how should I price my work, you know. That's a question I hate, you know, because they say, well, look, I spent nearly 3 months working on that, you know. So that actually has nothing to do with the price you charge for your work. You've got to look at it and evaluate it and see if it's a good work. You know, you have to know when you've produced a good work. And this thing of adding up the time that you made it, it's really got nothing to do with whether it's a good work or not. There was a guy in the college years ago, and he used to time himself drawing, and then he'd charge per minute, you know. So he had a value for a minute's work, and he put that value on the, you know, which was kind of interesting conceptual idea in itself, that he was an artist working to you know, he'd do a day's work and he'd charge for it. But I think in reality, you know, you can't do that. You have to look at the work, and sometimes something happens just very quickly. Something falls into place, and it might be the easiest print you ever made, or the easiest drawing, or the easiest painting, and it might also be the best, you know. And you've got to charge the premium rate for something that's good, you know. So yeah, I think sometimes people do respond well to a theme show, and sometimes they don't. And but you know, there's great diversity in it, you know. And I think that's really important, because sometimes, you know, you might say, well, what's happening in contemporary art at the moment? And the answer is everything, you know, everything is happening. It's not like in the past you could say, well, you know, the new expressionism was happening then. They were all doing big, loose figurative paintings. Or, you know, there was conceptualism was there then. It was all about the idea and the piece of text on the wall that explained what it was about. You know, but it's everything now. You know, you'll see a bit of conceptualism. You'll see a bit of minimalism. You'll see a bit of expressionism. Everything's happening at the same time. And that makes it a really difficult time to make art in some ways, and also a really good time to make art in others, because, you know, you can argue your case. You know, I remember seeing, I don't remember who the piece was by, up in Emma, I think there were flags, and the guy had put live beetles inside, and the beetles were eating the flags or eating their way through the works. Yeah, so what do you do when everything is okay? It's difficult. But it's also easy, because you realise, well, as a former director in the College of Art used to say, run it up the flagpole and see who salutes it. You know, Noel Sheridan used to say that all the time. And that's the test. Put it out there, put it in the public realm, get it seen, get it in a show, get it up on a wall as a billboard, or post it through somebody's letterbox or whatever, and get feedback on it. And that's when you'll know if it's art. If it strikes the right chord with somebody else. If it doesn't, well, maybe it could still be art, but it's good when you get a response, you know, that's reassuring, you know, you're doing something right.
And now when you mentioned the value, especially in printmaking, and the contemporary art time in general, how would you describe or place printmaking in it all? Because very often printmaking is still a bit disregarded as just a supportive medium.
Yeah, but it's only, you know, it's only disregarded when you call it printmaking, and that's because there's this big hang-up in the fine art world where people think that printmaking was a form of reproduction, and it still happens, you know. You'll still see that happening, and the same confusion. People will say, "Oh, I've done a print," and you say, "Well, where is it?" Oh, that. That's a giclée print. Oh, right, okay. But it looks a bit like one of your watercolors. Oh, it is. It's a giclée print of one of my watercolors. So it's a reproduction. Oh, yeah, but it's a print. Yeah, but it's a reproduction print. There's a difference, and. So people still have this problem with what a print is. You know, they don't understand what's really important, and what makes a print is when it originates in the process of print. It's drawn on a plate or on a stone or on a screen or whatever, or brought together as a composite in a computer program. So it's an original artwork that comes out of that printer. And sure, it's a giclée print because that's what, somebody called it a giclée print, but it's basically, it's an archival inkjet print. But it's what that print is what's important. Sometimes it can be a fine art original, and sometimes it can be a reproduction. And that's a problem, and that has always been a problem. When with print, people say, "Oh, but they're not. It's not real art. It's somebody just doing something to make a few bob on the side." But once print is assimilated into the art world, it is as valid, if not more valid, than any other medium. It's what you do with it. You know, I mean, the best collage work is up there with the finest painting, and the best sculpture. Collage is print. People use print. They cut it out, they stick it together, they recompose it. Screen printing, came into its own in the pop art era. Rembrandt's and Goya etchings are some of the finest artworks in the world. So it's not whether it's a print or a drawing or a painting that makes it art. It's how that work originated, and how that work was conceived, and how it became manifest as an artwork, and also that it uses print in a particular way. It's not just an artwork made as a print, but that it's an artwork that finds itself, becomes manifest through the process of print, and it brings some of that quality, or uses some of that quality, or avails of some of that quality in the making process. It's born within the print medium. And I think that's what makes a good print.